What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Logos Podcast. This is Max.
This is Joey.
And on today's episode, we have a very special guest and a friend of Logos Podcast, Matt Hylom. What's up, bro?
What's up, man? Thanks for having me on, guys.
Dude, Matt Hylom, we're excited about him. He's much more famous and popular than we are. Well, at least than Joey is. And
Sure.
We're excited to bring him on and talk about music, talk about creativity, talk about how the faith informs his creativity and the importance of the artist generally in the world, in society.
Yeah, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. I think that to start this episode out, what we need to do is introduce you to our listeners. Who are you? Like, tell us a little about yourself and why. Explain why we have the privilege of having you on our podcast right now.
So I am a singer-songwriter, producer, musician, kind of wear a lot of hats, entrepreneur, father. And so that's what I do for a living and creatively. I have a business called Morning Light Music, which y'all use one of my songs for Logos Podcast intro.
Yeah,
Dude, Matt,
did.
can I just say, I have explicitly had people tell me that if we change that song, they will stop listening to Logos. So thank you for producing
I would stop
that
listening.
song.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Logos jingle is thanks to Matt Hylom.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
produced it for us, so thank you so
Correct.
much.
Yeah, bro.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So that's essentially what I do on, aside from that, I'm just like a learner and reader and someone interested in things, the things y'all talk about on your podcast, philosophy, theology, religion, that stuff just interests me. And I love to like dive into that and then take all of that and put it into my music and express it as best I can.
It's interesting. I'm thinking right now that you just said that, how this is kind of you, Matt. You're kind of a rare combination. I'm thinking about Plato in some of his dialogues, talking about the poets. And what Plato would say about the poets is that, they were really enticing and they would, create beautiful poetry, beautiful music, and they would sound like they knew what they were talking about. But really, it was kind of deceptive because people would get drawn into listening to these poets and think they had a bunch of wisdom. But really, all they knew how to do was speak in a beautiful way, produce art in a beautiful way. And then, people like Socrates would criticize them because, if you dig a little deeper, they really don't have much behind that. So I'm fascinated that and amazed and appreciative that you are kind of combining these two aspects in your, like, not only are you making music, but that's actually flowing from substantive, like, wisdom and philosophical and theological reflection. So that's pretty cool.
And if I might add to that, Matt, when I first met you, one of the things that I was deeply attracted to kind of what you do in your project and who you are was the fact that, as Joey is pointing out, you're a seeker of truth. And that is very beautiful to see in a person that produces music and a person that influences culture in a certain way, because we have so much production out there. We're constantly hit with social media influencers and all kinds of other productions lacking that spirit, that what I would say an authentic creative spirit. So thank you for
sure.
that.
That's actually, I appreciate that, you guys. That's something I've been kind of struggling with myself because, when I look at the landscape of artists now, the majority of it is filled with like degenerates, not to say that I'm not one. We're all wretched, right? But there's something about living in a life of sin that will show you reality for what it is, right? In the bad sense, right? Like you're going to come up against reality. And so sometimes the artistic expression that comes from that is actually authentic and true. And it speaks to something beautiful, but because they had to go through it in that negative sense. And so in my own creativity and trying to live a virtuous life and doing things like being a father of 5 children, it's like, do I need to go sell drugs to have an experience? Like, do I need to go down to the depths in order to understand reality? Or is there a different type of ascent that I can try to align my will and align my mind with something higher that'll give me a deeper insight as well, as opposed to, hitting a brick wall and running into that yourself?
I was listening to somebody talk about Drake, the music producer, famous. You might know him. You know Drake? You ever heard of him? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was some interview he had, and he was mentioning how part of his kind of creative endeavor entails that he kind of separates himself from common living and goes to an environment that kind of fosters a certain spirit he's trying to infuse in his album, in his, whatever the case may be. And oftentimes that includes all kinds of crazy things, and that can, I think it speaks to what you're saying.
Bad things, crazy bad
like
things.
crazy bad things, like certain promiscuous living, maybe some sort of rituals, I would imagine.
Right.
And you see, I remember when I watched Daniel Caeser live. He's an R&B kind of singer, pop singer, and I remember watching him live, and he whipped out like a hyssop branch, right? And he lit it on fire, and he was kind of incensing the people.
Whoa.
And but I remember thinking to myself, like, when you get involved and when you try to kind of take hold of the creative spirit, if you will, by immersing yourself in this thing, it produces a certain atmosphere. It influences in a particular way. Whereas, as you're saying, you're kind of living kind of a juxtaposed position, not seeking those things. You're trying to seek a truly ritual life, a truly substantive life that is expressed, I think, through your music, hopefully.
What was that? Isn't there a quote from Chesterton where he's like, the greatest adventure is an ordinary man living an ordinary life? Something to that effect. Where that's kind of what I'm trying to do in my life. Is like, I'm not going out to seek thrills. I'm trying to seek the thrill in the ordinary, like having a ritual, having to go home and feed my kids and change their diapers, and like constantly, I've been doing this for a decade right now. My oldest is almost 11. And so trying to live deeply into that, and my relationship with my wife, all of those things are informing my art, and obviously informing my spiritual life as well, as I'm reading and I'm praying. Like, my hope is that I can see the infinite in something as simple as that, as something as simple as being a father to my children.
And then what's cool is through your music, through your creativity, try to draw other people into that experience, I'm guessing, yeah?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, which is different from someone like Drake, who, I'm thinking, like, people do listen to Drake and they can relate to things that he's saying because they've experienced sin and brokenness and kind of the thrill maybe of,
but also the sensations he brings out in his music, probably.
But yeah, it's like, which way does listening to a Drake album orient us? Does it orient us down, or like does it draw us up?
For sure.
And I often think it orients us down. Speaking of Drake, what kind of tell our listeners, like, what kind of genre, like what kind of music do you make?
It is eclectic. It's
eclectic.
I like broadly categorized. Like, when I submit the song for release on distribution, it's pop, but it's anything from pop, electronic, hip hop. It's all really infused. Yeah, I mean, that's how I grew up. I never had a like specific genre that I listened to. I grew up, fairly sheltered, so I wasn't allowed to listen to like secular music all the time. But my dad always had like 80s disco on, the Gypsy Kings, like the craziest blend of genres. So that's just how I grew up. And then so like overall, the overarching like thing for me with music, my love of music, wasn't a particular genre. It was like the feeling. Like, my dad was never like an analyzer of music. He would be like, oh, the lyrics or whatever, but he would put it on for a vibe. And so like what I got from music was like, if the vibe is right, then the music is good. So
and music is super important in that, right? Like, music
sure.
like can influence atmosphere. If you have like
absolutely
a certain song at a wedding, it's going to influence atmosphere.
Makes a difference. Yeah.
So hey, also Matt, if I remember correctly, you're a big fan of 21 Pilots. Is that true?
Yep.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation. It just came to mind. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But
21 Pilots, John Bellion.
Yeah. I knew the 21 Pilots when they were like, before they were big. I mean, they led like a young life in the area that I grew up in.
Oh, no kidding.
Wow.
And I would like go to it, and they would be there playing songs, and then
That's
like, a few
crazy.
years later they were big. Like, they were big time.
Were you a young life at the Young Life?
I was a young blood at the young.
Wow, dude, you're a gang
Wow.
member.
That's
Crip
crazy.
versus Blood members. Joey's out here.
No, I was not. I was middle school Joey. Not a great time.
Nice.
Okay, so wow. All right. I didn't know you were a father of 5. That's amazing. And also you've quoted Chesterton already. You've mentioned the spiritual life. So we can reveal to our listeners that you are in fact Catholic. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, that's exciting. Have you always been Catholic, or did that
Yeah.
happen later? Okay.
Yeah, born and raised. Both my parents are Spanish, so they had like in their own life a little reversion from going from just culturally Catholic to like more authentically Catholic and trying to practice. And then I think I was 8 or 9 when that happened. No, it must have been younger. But yeah, so I always grew up super Catholic, if you want to say it that way.
And I'm just curious, was there a moment in your life, like was it 8 or 9 years old and you were like all in, or was there a moment in your life where the faith became something real and meaningful to you personally?
That's definitely a difficult question. I think my family growing up erred on the side of like ultra conservative. We'll just say that. And then it wasn't until, so it was very much like you do the things because you were told to do the things, and not a lot of question why. And then it wasn't until my sister and my brother both went to Belmont Abbey here in North Carolina, that they started bringing things back to the family, like literature, and philosophy, and kind of peeling back the layer as to why we believe what we believe, and then having a deep sense of like, this is the meaning of the universe, as opposed to like, this is just what we do as a family. So I didn't go to Belmont Abbey. I went to UNC Charlotte for exercise science. That was my degree. So I was out of secular school, but seeing my siblings go through that process and then bringing it back and talking to them about it, like really just inspired me to grab whatever I could, like just tell them, like, tell me a book to read and I'll read it. And so I've been on that kind of eclectic grabbing of whatever book interests me ever since.
That's awesome. Praise God for that.
Yeah, dude, I want to draw on Pope St. John Paul II.
I think I've heard of him.
You've heard of him, Matt? This is becoming a joke.
Like Drake.
We'll say like Drake and, Jake, Pope St. John Paul II, same category, of the greats.
Same genre.
The greats.
Of the greats. He wrote a letter to artists, which I think we've mentioned on our podcast maybe a couple of times before. He wrote it in 1999, and he was kind of trying to motivate the artists of the world. And, he brought an interesting point in this letter, saying that he had noticed a shift in the artistic spirit, artistic inspiration. He noticed that there's a culture that is trying to produce art, but within that production, the absence of God is present. So there's no God in the artistic expression. And he's recognizing that because that's happening, we're trying to build two different systems of life. He calls it like the system of art and then the system of faith, right? And so you kind of live this double life. And art is, ironically, however, one of the only tools capable of bringing together the experience of life and the kind of the doctrine, the metaphysics. It's like one of the only tools capable of bringing beauty, goodness, and truth all together in one. And so oftentimes people, as I think we mentioned at the beginning, at least touching on it, when God is absent from the creative endeavor, it becomes fragmented. It can become disoriented. However, you, interestingly, pose an example contrary to that. You do have God in your life, and you've allowed him to infuse, to some extent or another, your creative endeavor. And so I want to ask you, as an example of an artist who does have God in his life and who tries to bring that about in your creative process. First off, how does your faith and your principles, your ideas, philosophy, theology, how do those things influence your creative process? And then what is your creative process actually?
Well, first I will say, huge caveat. I try to do those things. I don't necessarily accomplish them all the time. I like, credit where credit is due, and also where it's not. Like we're all attempting these things. But the way that my Catholic faith informs my creative work, I think ultimately it is the lens by which I see the world. So, aspects of reality that are kind of like precepts of the church, the way that the morality is laid out in the church, and the way that we understand how we should interact with each other, and the way that we should interact with the world. All of that, for me, as my worldview, comes from Catholicism. And so when I'm gathering stories together, gathering images together, they're always in the lens of how are these things related in light of what has been revealed through the church. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know it doesn't. We've talked about this personally one time, Matt, but like, just because your music isn't explicitly Christian in theme doesn't mean that it's not guided by God, right?
Correct.
And I think oftentimes,
that's important.
And I think oftentimes people who try to force, Jesus Christ into everything they do can come off as tryhards, weird, and also like. Yeah. It's almost like they're not living in real life. It's like, hey, like there's also suffering to life, and while Jesus Christ is guiding me, I don't have to mention His name every second to be a Christian.
Right.
And so,
so this is something that I've been super adamant on, in that seeing everything as a hierarchical system in which like let pop music be pop music, right? We don't have to infuse all of that with all the dogmas of the church, particularly because it's not for something like sacred liturgy, right? Like you're not singing this song at Mass, and so it doesn't have to have this hierarchy of holiness, if you will. It can stay below there, and that's okay. As long as it's not degrading, it has to have its place. And so, like, one of the examples I give of this is like having like a pillow with like religious art on it. Like if you had a little Mary stitched on your pillow, it's like you're trying to like baptize this pillow because without it, it would be unholy, or like it wouldn't be Catholic enough. It's like, no, the pillow can be the pillow. Like we should beautify our house with decorations. They don't all have to have miraculous medals hanging all over it, because those things are in themselves good. And we should see the truth, goodness, and beauty in all those things and let them be there in their hierarchical place. Obviously, that's not to say like religious art should have no place. It should have a place, but a higher place, right? So when you're intentional about that religious art, it should be like the centerpiece of your house, as opposed to just scattering it around, because otherwise it would be bad. Like pillows are evil until I put a miraculous medal on it. So that's kind of how I see art, and like even especially because I have my company Morning Light Music, which is just instrumental. So it's like, is that Catholic art? It's like, I'm a Catholic and I'm making music. I don't know what the answer is there.
Wow. Yeah. No, and I think you said that exactly right. Like, even if they don't have the miraculous medal stamped on them, or even if you're not mentioning the name of our Lord, like, insofar as these things are true, good, and beautiful, they are leading people to God. Like, because any encounter with reality, any encounter with the true, the good, and the beautiful is, even if not explicitly, it's implicitly an encounter with God. So the fact that the music you're producing, the things that you're creating, are flowing forth from your heart, which is itself informed by and in a relationship with the living God, I think that's so. And yeah, I really appreciate the point you made too about if you try to bring like Jesus and the explicit, doctrines and dogmas into everything, then they lose their distinctive place where they really matter, like in the church, right? Or like, in the centerpiece of the home. Wow, that's really awesome.
Right. One of the images that I like about this concept is just the image of a church itself, right? You have the sanctuary, you have the nave, you have the narthex, and on the exterior you have gargoyles, right? You're not going to take a gargoyle and put it in the sanctuary, right? You're not going to put what should be in the narthex and put it in the sanctuary. That doesn't mean it's not part of the church. It just means that it has to exist in its hierarchical system in order for it to be a whole.
And in fact, it's glorified when it's put in its proper place. I like this concept of kind of a unified living, right? There's not a distinction between your faith or the principles that guide you and your creative endeavor. And I want to draw on that because what are some, for example, maybe some people that influence you, some principles that through those maybe creators that are popular or philosophers or thinkers that guide your own thought? It can be popular or maybe ancient, maybe some we've mentioned like Plato and stuff, but maybe some others that do that. And as such, how do those, like because you're reading, because you're praying, because you're trying to live your ordinary life as best you can, ordinary, whatever that means. How that just kind of naturally transpires, or does it naturally transpire into your work?
The way an artist's mind works is like, at least for me, I can speak on my experience. I read things and quickly forget them. And so I'm not like trying to infuse Plato into a song or,
Then why'd you come on this podcast? I don't understand.
But what it does, the thing is, what it does for me is it creates like an atmosphere. And so I have all these images and ideas and philosophies that create kind of a fog that I can see through in order to create my work. I'm hesitant to name things because I know that y'all are going to just kind of ask follow-ups and be like, well, then tell me about existentialism if I say I like existentialism. I do like the idea, the existential idea, the phenomenological idea of seeing from one's perspective and how that has validity as opposed to a more top-down view of the world. I like Ratzinger, Plato, all of those, that Neoplatonic strain in Catholicism I love. Like more modern thinkers right now, like Jonathan Peugeot, Jordan Peterson. They both speak with somebody frequently named John Vervaeke. And then who is another one? Ian McGilchrist. He's a neurologist, or a psychiatrist and a writer. He has like a huge book called The Matter with Things, which kind of talks about the biology of the mind, but then how its philosophical implications. But seeing that through a Catholic lens is just so interesting to me. But again, it's like, so how does that show up in your music? It's like, I don't know. Like this is it just kind of creates the air.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking of an analogy from what you just said to really the whole Christian life, the moral life. So we have this idea in Christianity, in Catholicism especially, of virtue, right? And virtue is when you're virtuous, you have internalized the law. So, God, he creates and he endows us with reason, and he gives positive laws, like he gives the 10 Commandments, and then there are precepts of of the law. But the virtuous person is not the person who is going around with like a mental checklist of all the rules he has to follow and then like trying to explicitly implement them in his life. The virtuous person is the one who has internalized those laws so that they've become a part of him. They're written on his heart. So he's not like going through a catalog of rules and regulations that he's got to follow. He's spontaneously acting in a way that's, the law has become second nature to him, right? It's flowing out of him as if it's natural. And it's not like he's thinking, oh, I need to do this because God said this. It's spontaneous now. And I'm imagining that in your creative process, that's kind of what I'm just hearing you describe. It's like you're immersed in this beautiful tradition of the faith that you've inherited and philosophy and theology and all these different sources. And it's not like you're like, okay, Aquinas says this, so I'm going to make this a lyric in my song. It's like you've internalized these things, and then when it comes time to create, they flow out of you in a way that you don't even fully understand, but that's spontaneous and beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. That was beautifully said. That's I had just released an episode on my podcast about artistic intuition, just kind of alluding to that exact point of in the same way that an athlete would follow all the rules and train, when it comes to game time, they're not like, okay, remember the drills. It's all intuition. It's instinct. And it's second nature to them. And that's what makes a beautiful performance. So the same thing for, any artist or musical performer, same thing. All the rules, all the music theory, all of that becomes internalized and then lived intuitively. And so that's essentially what I do with my art, but then also like in conjunction with my life, like I'm not thinking about the 10 Commandments when I'm going about my day. It's like it's infused into me and I'm just living it as best I can. Yeah.
There's a quote here by Pope St. John Paul II again. It reads, talking about creative intuition, it says, "You are invited to use your creative intuition to enter into the heart of the mystery of the incarnate God, and at the same time into the mystery of man." Right? So like by you living in a certain way, as best as you can, as best as we can, the Christian life, truth, we're able to draw others into that same dimension. By, as you're pointing out, that kind of the creative intuition, we're able to draw people into their intuition, to remind them that they're also capable of glorifying God through their life, to becoming who they are as human people, but also to remember their creator, to remember who they were created by and created for.
Yeah, and the sorry if I may, the other cool thing about that too is that like what music does, what your creativity does is it puts people in touch with God under a different aspect than they would be in touch with God if they were, say reading Aquinas, right? So like you're communicating truth in a musical mode. And there's something about that. There's something that music can communicate, even if it's not as technically precise or theologically distinct as, the Summa Theologia. Like, nevertheless, when I listen to your songs, when I listen to music, it's like I'm getting put in touch with God in a way that even Aquinas could not in the Summa Theologia, just because of the nature of the medium, which is so cool.
And there's also intrinsic to music is rhythm. Intrinsic to music is harmony. Intrinsic to music is memory and imagination. And so by intuitively producing what you know to be best from your own intuition, you're able to foster what is beautiful, what is kind of a foundation of hope for man. Like he himself, his heart beats at a certain rhythm. And there's a reason why, for example, if you go to like a high school football game, you can hear the bass drum and it pumps you up. And there's a reason why you can almost like tap your foot to any song that comes on. There's something rhythmic, there's a pattern within creation that I think we intuit as people, but then we try to reproduce it through the material world we're given to draw us into something that's universal.
For sure. Yeah, that's exactly right. Music for me is just that on the simplest terms, it's pattern recognition and pattern layering, right? So you have so many you have just a series of frequencies and rhythms that are layered on top of each other to show you that all of these things, all of your desires, all of your passions, if they're out of sync, right, then they ruin the song of your life, right? And there's a way that they all don't become one. You don't have to compress this all to get rid of certain things. They can all dance together in a way that creates a beautiful symphony. So that essentially, aside from the lyrical aspect, just music itself is using the medium of sound to show how various aspects of yourself, of your life, like my role in life, your role in life, we all dance together to create this song.
On a very practical level, I'm just curious, like, what is your process for writing a song? Is it the type of thing where, like, you set a certain time aside and you, like, sit down, you're like, I'm going to write a song now? Or is it much more like you're changing diapers and an idea occurs to you and you put the diapers down and
you throw the baby outside,
the cry, and then start writing songs?
I know you're going to develop a rash, but this beat is sick. Hold on.
I got a sick beat in my head. Just wait a second, dude. It'll be fire.
I do that sometimes, but not to the point of a rash. So the answer is actually both, because the inspiration is always coming. And, I have, like, luckily we have the technology of phones where I can, open up my voice notes and put an idea in and then come back to it later. But because my life is so routinized, given my practical life, I do have to set like I do try my best to work like a 9 to 5 shift, as opposed to just like, oh, whenever I feel like it, I'll go into the studio and make music. I've always kept it like I go to work, I write, I come home. And so there's like micro routines in that to get me in the headspace, if you will, in order to be creative. And so I'm always starting with prayer. And then it really is a kind of turning off of the mind and working intuitively, going through sound libraries, seeing what works, or pulling out the voice notes and then fleshing out an idea. And then if I usually start with like a beat or a loop of some sort, and if that's inspiring enough to feel like it's going to develop further, I'll just like loop it and like pace around my room for however long it takes, mumbling lyrics. And it really is that it's like a discovery. It's like I'm not like trying to put something there. I'm trying to like hear what the words are, and sometimes it comes out mumbled. It's very hard to describe, but yeah, that is the process. And then eventually you just have this recurring like phrase or something, and you get the glimpse of what this song is about. And you're like, oh, okay. And then I can like pin that and then go back and think about everything I know symbolically, pull in some of the philosophy and trying to flesh out ideas, other literature I've read and how images work, and lay out some ideas, and then, loop it again and just come up with more and more things.
Yeah, this reminds me of like what you're expressing to me, it seems this is kind of the way that human beings work. Like we experience things and use our sensate abilities, our imagination, our memory, what comes kind of natural to us, and then kind of, as Joey's saying, kind of bring them up to something higher. It's not as if like you're probably not reading, I don't know, Joseph Pieper, who I know you like, and we like, and everybody knows that we like. It's not like you're reading his book on artists, right? Mm-hmm. Only the Lover Sings, Art and Contemplation. It's not like you're bringing some principles from that book. Shout out to Joseph Pieper and that book. It's not like you're reading his philosophy and you're like, okay, how does this idea form this song? Bridge, chorus, conclusion. Out of here. That's not. That's not how man works. Like as you said, like you're bringing things that have motivated you. I mean, I assume you have some journal or something that kind of keeps you in sync with what you've been thinking and what motivates you. And it's sometimes ideas and sometimes just your life experience, if I had to guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even something as simple as an interaction with my kid, nothing is that simple for me. Like I will hold on to a memory and then see how it plays out at a fractal level on different levels of reality, how it applies to just other people, how I can tell a story about it. And so I'm always constantly moving at different levels of that hierarchy within an experience to try to see if there's something there. Yeah, so I mean, it really is just kind of a mindset that I'm constantly in.
Yeah, and really this is so cool. So, I mean, the process you just described of, discovering really like a new song within yourself, like mm-hmm. letting it, what that helped me to understand in a new way is precisely why, now I understand that the reason that the poets that Plato and Socrates used to criticize didn't actually have any wisdom is that they weren't Catholic. And what I mean by that is this. Okay, so think about someone like Drake or like whoever, someone who's not Catholic who mm-hmm. has, and because they're not so here's the thing about the Catholic worldview. It's not only is it integral and it's whole and it's beautiful, it's also true. So when you're viewing the world as we are blessed to do, having received divine revelation through that lens, then everything is symphonic in a way. You see truth and goodness and beauty everywhere in the reflection of the Creator and all these hierarchical levels. It's that's part of the adventure of the faith, is just like being drawn further and further into this truth. You can I'm thinking of the example of an artist like Drake, who probably goes through a similar process of putting on a beat, getting himself in the right headspace, and probably discovering something within him that does flow out, and then being able to produce it. But that it's like, okay, first of all, where is that coming from in Drake if it's not coming from an encounter with God in Scripture or from, the good and beauty? But also then after he produces it, after it does flow out of him, where does he go to understand what it is that he's discovered? And Drake's just a characterization, an example right now of an example of someone who's not Catholic, because the poets don't have that foundation to go back and then thereby understand what they've discovered. That's why they're missing something, and which is why it's so cool, I think, that you discover something within yourself, it flows out of you, you create it, and then you can go back and be like, wow, now I'm seeing precisely where this came from, how it corresponds to the rest of my life, to my faith, to reality.
It really is a dance.
It's pretty sweet.
Really is that dance of having that inner discourse, and then really looking at it and holding it up against the light of the tradition you follow. Right? For me, it's Catholicism. But like, to your point, if Drake were to hold that up against whatever his values were, like, what would he see? And so, like, maybe he says, this is great. This is exactly who I am and how this is going to go out, and he puts it out. But that's not necessarily wisdom. But yeah, it's tough too, because there are plenty of people, obviously, plenty of artists who speak profound wisdom without necessarily knowing it.
Right, and Drake says wise things sometimes.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, right.
Like the world needs change, and I'm the cashier.
I mean, come on, like that's
come on, dude.
All
summer 16.
All summer 16.
I mean,
Oh my gosh. Yeah, but if it's I don't like the distinction. I don't like to make a false dichotomy of, like, if you're Catholic, you automatically create the best art.
That's true.
That's a great point.
There's still, like, the skill set of songwriting.
Yes.
Storytelling. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Like a non-Catholic, an atheist, a Satanist for that matter, can write a human story, and it actually pertains to truths about the world, which encompass everything that Catholicism teaches. So it's actually not contradictory, but they're stumbling on it in a way that's from a different angle, right? They're not coming at it like, how does this fit with my faith? It's like, oh, I went to the bar and got beat up because I was an ass to somebody. And you write a story about that. It's like, yeah, that's really going to happen. Like, that's a real thing. It's like, is that in line with Catholicism? It's like, it's true. So yes, but it's not dogmatic. Yeah, so it's kind of hard to make that distinction.
And like, so this goes back to a point we made earlier. Like, one of the important things about, one of the things that in explicitly, for example, kind of Christian form, is that it can oftentimes come off as not actually relating to human experience. And so we don't say, for example, that, like, the Catholic faith is a Catholic faith because the Catholic Church exists and it composes its own system. We see the Catholic Church as the Catholic Church, and it's true because it's true. So reality is actually the grounding that gives the Catholic Church its credibility. And so the person who, like you said, is an atheist, a person who's non-Christian, can also produce great and beautiful and inspiring music, some of which inspired me, poets. But it all comes from the fact that I think the universal experience that we were created from a creator. And I think that JB2, again, draws this out in his letter to artists. It's like, we're all trying to repaint the face of God. And music, beauty, art, at its best, does that. As you're saying, accidentally, but with the Catholic, with the Christian, purposively. Like, there's a directedness with the creative endeavor that I think is unique to in this case a Catholic, as opposed to somebody who is not, because universality is what's drawing man together, and this is what I think at the best beauty is trying to do through the expression.
I think that it's a danger within people who are Catholic or who are religious to kind of rest on your laurels and be like, I'm just going to create at whatever level I think, good or bad, but it's religious, it's Catholic, it's Christian music. And therefore they get a pass and be like, it's kind of like so production-wise, songwriting-wise, but it's a good message. Like, I hate that. Like, I'll just be frank. I really don't like that. And for the same reason why I don't like putting miraculous medals on your pillow. You know what I'm saying? It's like, make good music, right? It's the goodness and the beauty of it that's the message. It's not the fact that you're reciting dogmas in your lyrics. Like, it's the fact that it's good music, right? So it's like you have to learn the craft first, right? The particular craft you're in, like, beautify that. And then with the information of your Catholic faith, see how the world opens up to you and the images you pull and the ideas you put out. Obviously, you're not going to put in anything degrading, but that's it. That's the game.
And that's because goodness, truth, and beauty are objective realities.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right? They include the subject, but they're objective in and of themselves, and that's what makes them attractive to begin with. Right?
Yeah, and also, again, this transfers to just all aspects of life. Like, if you're pursuing holiness and you want to offer your life to God, and you work in an office, it's like one of the ways that you sanctify that work, that life, that day to day is by doing your work excellently, right? It's like
exactly
do it to the best of your ability, not for your own sake, but precisely in order to glorify God. And in and through that work, even the most mundane tasks, even if you're washing the dishes. This is why if you go to a convent, they're like the cleanest places ever. It's because those nuns who love Jesus, when they clean, they're not doing it to have a clean convent. They're doing everything out of love for Jesus. And so they do it incredibly. And so it's a similar logic to what you were just saying. Like, if you're an artist, if you're a Catholic artist, make beautiful music, and offer that excellence to the Lord rather than just falling back on these, on kind of the shallow, there's a good message.
My sister draws with colored pencils. She's amazing.
She is amazing. I've seen some of her work. She's awesome.
Yeah, from a steady hand on Instagram. Shout out. But she was asked. She draws like, realistic pictures of whatever, like a flower or ink blots or paint, whatever it is, just like kind of still life stuff.
Nike Air Forces is one of my favorite one that she paints. She drew.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. She was asked, like, why don't you draw religious art? Because that was better. It's like, obviously you're Catholic, you should draw Catholic art. And I she gave her a response that I think I agree with, and is that, like, that's not what I want to do. And that doesn't make the thing it's like the muse is calling you, it's like, it doesn't make the work less Catholic if it's a picture of sneakers, because our understanding of Catholicism is not a list of dogmas, right? It's a way of life. It's knowing that truth, goodness, and beauty infuses everything. And so your goal as an artist is to gather the beautiful things and present them, or represent them to the world. And that hopefully inspires people, like you were saying, to live their 9-to-5 desk job the best they can, right? Not to be like, do I need to put like a crucifix at every corner of my cubicle because then I'm not living a Catholic life in my 9-to-5. It's like, no, you don't. You could put a cross to remind you, for sure. Wear a scapular. But you don't have to go that explicit with that. We just have lost that idea of living intuitively and living implicitly.
I remember, I think I was just listening to Peter Mckinnon. He's a YouTuber, famous kind of cinematographer, videographer, photographer. He's popular on YouTube, but he talks about kind of the creative as someone who is gifted with the ability to create things, with the desire to want to create beautiful things, but it can sometimes be a burden. And I wanted to ask you if you've experienced that, right? Because like sometimes we're talking about it in a very enthusiastic, zealous, and hopeful way, because I think creative at its best does that. It gives us hope. But I'm sure sometimes there can be times of what we would call kind of desolation, times of darkness, times where it doesn't flow so easily, and you're kind of sitting in your room and you've wasted a whole week using the same 4 snare drum beats and a hi-hat. You're like, I don't know what to do with this.
Gosh.
So like,
I'm having flashbacks.
It's called trauma, brother. I know a psychologist. I'll hook you up. Don't worry about it. But like, Peter McKinnon talks about, like, there's this wrestling match that the creative oftentimes undergoes, right? And so sometimes he, for example, will distance himself from YouTube for a while to find kind of the headspace. Shout out Headspace. Matt, is it Matt Hylom Headspace? Is it Matt's Headspace?
Yeah.
Is it just Headspace? Is it the space of the head?
The Matt Hylom Headspace is the podcast. The song is just called Headspace.
Okay, cool. So my point being,
Yep.
so like, have you ever found that in your own creative process?
Yeah, every day, man. I recorded an episode of my podcast this morning, and I like hit end, and I was like, that was awful. And
That's happened here
yeah,
too.
all of my, yeah, like it's a roller coaster, dude. Like I hate complaining about what I get to do for a living, which is create music. You know, like it seems like, oh, wow, you know, easy for you to say, or I wish I had that problem. But, you know, speaking to other artists, it really is a thing that happens. It's a roller coaster of emotions going from something you hate to something you love. And, you know, it does feel like a curse sometimes where I wish I could just kind of turn my brain off and talk to my friends about whatever, as opposed to be like, no, bro, we gotta talk about fractal reality, like this. So yeah, it's definitely a dance that I try to wrestle with all the time. But you know, living my practical life as a father really keeps me grounded. You know, like it's like, cool story, bro. You have all these ideas. You don't like your music. You do like your music. Nice. Okay, kids are hungry. Like, go do the thing. Like, it really helps me to like reorient of like, why am I doing this? What is this for? Give some perspective. It's everything.
It behooves us to mention that I'm sure your wife has a lot to do with both supporting your mission, but also helping you along your creative way.
Absolutely. Yeah, she I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Big Five personality score. It's kind of like the temperaments. She ranks very low in creativity. And openness that's the scale. And I rank like 97th percentile. And so that would be a red flag, like on paper, of like, oh, you guys are not going to think the same. But honestly, it's been like my saving grace that like I have an anchor in like in tangible reality that's like, hey, bills need to be paid. And like, are you going to clean the dishes after dinner? Like that, it allows me to have more freedom when I go into my chaotic creativity space, that I have somebody like that to anchor me down.
That's so beautiful.
And then vice versa, you know, like her anchoredness is then lifted higher by my creativity. There's a play there that's really indescribable.
I'm curious, as a husband, as a father, who you're blessed to be able to do what you love for a living, and to support your family with this endeavor, with your passion. How do you ever, like, I could imagine a scenario in which, you know, in beginning stages of your career, you got nothing to lose and you're just making music. It's pure. It's just like totally from authentic inspiration. And then like responsibilities start to add up and you've got to like pay the bills. And now it's like, okay, I'm doing this more to make money than I am like from an authentic heart. How do you kind of walk that line and stay true to like the creativity, the authenticity of your mission?
For sure. That's a good question. That's kind of where my career split early on. I knew that I kind of wanted to let my creative side as Matt Hylom be its own thing and not let any monetary like influence affect that. And so very soon I split into like building a business around Morning Light Music, which is my company that essentially I have like a library of 200 songs that people license. And so I kind of I'm also high in industriousness, like back to that Big Five score, like which means that like I'm entrepreneurial. And so my artistic side is also curbed by this entrepreneurial side of me that knows how to build a business. And so I kind of combined the two and was able to build Morning Light Music out to what it is now. And that became more of a study of the market, more of like, I got to pay bills. I have this skill set of making music. Let me see how I can make this work in the market, advertising, YouTube, etc. And so that was the outlet there. And then I could let my creative work on the side be its own thing and take its time to develop however it will. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, some people don't have that, and that is a constant tension of having to, you know, like I want to express myself artistically, but I also do got to pay bills, and, you know, my heart goes out to those people.
I have a couple questions for you, if you'd allow me.
Yeah.
I know I've had real light questions for you up to now. Honestly, pretty simple, chill, down earth.
Yeah.
But I have a couple questions that I wanted to run by you. You know,
Go.
there are many different ways of kind of having a creative outlet. There's art, poetry, writing, literature. But you chose music. Is there a particular reason, just out of curiosity? Like, what motivated that out of everything else? I mean, grace would be one, but I'm sure nurture had something to do with it, maybe?
Yes, for sure. I didn't choose music. Music chose me. Like kind of like the thug life, but
Like the thug life, too.
but yeah, it really was. It was like I couldn't tell you. Like if I tried to make up a response of like, here's why music is my artistic. Like I loved music. Like I grew up. My first introduction to like I want to play music so bad was watching Back to the Future. I don't know if you guys have seen that. Old film. And Marty McFly is playing the guitar in the scene where he's like, he traveled back in time and he's playing Johnny Be Good. And I saw that scene and I was like, I want to play music forever. I was like 6 and it was not the best film to watch at that age.
Sure.
Yeah, so that was it. Like that's why music and not anything else. I'm not formally educated. Like I do have a degree, but it's in exercise science. I don't have a literature degree. I'm like not proficient at writing. So that was never going to be an option to tell stories. I can like only speak in like, 2-verse form. And that's it. That's all I got to say.
That's most guys, bro.
Yeah.
Most guys, I would say.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, Max had a couple questions, but I'm going to interrupt and ask a question that he was probably going to ask anyway.
Classic move.
Which is, and this is a big overarching question that we have that we've talked about on this podcast, but be curious to get your take on it. Like, in the world that we live in today, in 21st century America especially, but really just right now, like, what do you see the role of creatives, artists like yourself playing? It's like, why is it so important that we have people like you? Why is it so important? And not to like hype yourself up necessarily, but just like in general, this endeavor, this contribution to society, to humanity. Why do you see it as so important?
I don't think that there are creatives and non-creatives. And if there are, I think we should try to reconcile the two. I see everything as a creative act, everything that humans do. And so on a broader sense, I think that the role of creatives is to awaken that aspect within everybody, that there's something important about art, there's something important about beauty, there's something important about our expression creatively in our own lives. So like on the higher level, people who actually do this for a living or people that are known for their artistic expression, I think they're just kind of the beacons that are showing everybody to do that within their own lives. It's kind of like the way you would ask, like, what is the role of sports? It's like, well, it's not to inspire everybody to play basketball. It's to inspire everybody to greatness. And that's why we watch athletes and we say, like, that's amazing, that's inspiring, not because I want to go play basketball. Maybe I do, but maybe I have nothing to do with basketball. Maybe I'm going to go live my life the best I can because I was inspired by that. So artists stand as a beacon in that sense, to awaken that creative aspect in us. I will say this. I heard y'all's podcast, the last one you guys released on memory. And I think that there's something there that has to do with the creative in the fact, well, so we'll start. My proposition is that the priest is the ultimate artist, in that he takes the fruit of the earth and work of human hands, right? And recreates the sacrifice at the cross.
For our listeners who aren't aware, by the way, of that phrase, that's a portion of the Mass.
Yep.
Yeah, fruit of the earth and work of human hands is part of the ritual of the Mass in the Catholic faith. Anyways, go
Correct.
ahead.
Yep. So this kind of gathering of the world back up to the Father is the whole exitus et reditus, right? It's the ultimate form of gathering the things from the world and bringing it back into the whole universal procession back to God. I think that's what artists do, right? In a smaller level, we take things of the earth and we manipulate it, and then we represent it to be the glory of God. Now, obviously, you guys talked about memory and being this, the anamnesis, and how that relates to Christ offering his body. Do this in memory of me. There's something to do there with remembrance. Because the way I see it is that the opposite of remembrance is dismemberment, right? Like you could say it's forgetting, but the opposite, so if you understand remembrance as to remember something, to bring the members back, is to gather together. And the opposite of that would be to dismember. And that's a form of distraction, right? Then now you're falling into things like harmatia and sin, right? You're not focused. Correct. Yep. All of that is like encapsulated in this idea of memory and remembrance. Joey, you talked about memory as identity. And I think that there's something profound about that, in that our remembrance is our identity, in that we are to recognize the Father, right? That's our ultimate goal. I'm trying to, I'm like at the edge of my thinking right now, trying to articulate this. So priests as the ultimate artist, because sacrifice, let's move to sacrifice. Sacrifice is essentially attention, right? I know Jonathan Peugeot talks about this a lot, if you're not familiar with his work, as sacrifice being attention, in that like when you focus attention, right, you pay attention, which means that you're not paying attention to something else, right? You have to sacrifice the distraction, the harmatia, right? So like attention takes a focus. In order to focus on something, you have to take all of the things that were dismembers, that were fragmented, and to remember them into attention. All of that's in there, right? So that essentially artists are doing that, in that they're bringing to attention, they're calling you to remember certain things. At the highest point, the priest is doing that. So I don't know where to go from there, but it's one of those things that it's hard to explain, that everything we do is attention and sacrifice, right? Like what should I brush my teeth in the morning? Well, it depends. Like how much time and attention am I going to put to that, because of how it exists in the hierarchy of my day? Like it's for my health, because I am a husband, because I want my children to flourish, because I want to educate them. I want them to be good Catholics. And so I need to be alive to do that. I'm going to try my best because I'm a temple of the Holy Spirit. So yes, I'm going to brush my teeth. I'm like remembering all of the aspects of my life into focused purpose. And so as an artist, the definition of the way I would define artists is pattern recognizers, right? Sorry if this is going all over the place, but I'm trying to pull all these things in. I'm just going to like throw them all together. So artists being pattern recognizers, breaking down that term pattern recognition, there is the etymology of pattern, which is pater, father, right? So you have pattern above and mater below, pattern and matter. So you have heaven and earth, masculine and feminine. And then to recognize is to recognize, right? To bring back into cognition, to remember. So artists as pattern recognizers are micro versions of remembering the Father, remembering the highest pattern, right? And so
instances of God.
Correct, right. And at the highest level, the highest thing you can ever do on this earth to recognize the pattern is the Eucharist. Right? It is the ultimate sacrifice. It's the ultimate form of attention. And so all of my attempts to recognize the pattern, to recognize the Father, to remember everything, those are all insufficient. And so the highest form of that is doing that through Christ, right? The doxology, when you say through him, with him, and in him. Glory to you, Almighty Father, right? That is the ultimate form of pattern recognition. It's through Christ, through his sacrifice, through his remembering, that our life, that we have identity, right? To your point about memory being that form of identity. And so when you ask, like, what do creatives have as a role in the world? It's like, everything. Like, it's everything, man. It's everything.
Yeah, dude.
Wow.
First of all, that's a great. I think we need to talk about this more, Matt, and flesh this out and make another episode in the future, because that is beautiful. Yeah. I was my kind of last remark here, personally, I was thinking about this past summer. I took some time to kind of read up on Michelangelo and his work, some letters he exchanged. I read some chapters of a book that was dedicated to him, watched a couple movies on him. And one of the interesting things I found throughout kind of my quote-unquote research is that he was commissioned by Pope Julius to paint the Sistine Chapel. He was commissioned by Pope Julius to do several things, one of which was the Sistine Chapel. And he couldn't find the inspiration. He couldn't kind of pin it down. Like, what do I do here exactly? What does the Pope want me to do? The Pope's off at war, and I'm kind of here in this huge church. I don't know what to do with this empty space. And eventually, he's, after years of wrestling and trying to think about ideas and praying kind of and living his debaucherous life, comes back and finally decides, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to paint the creation account, right, in Genesis, that we read in Genesis. But there's a portion of that painting where he's trying to paint Adam kind of reaching up to God with his finger, and then God reaching down with his finger. And in one of the movies, it depicts the bishops and the cardinals and some of the priests kind of scandalized at this. How can this good-for-nothing sinner of a painter come up here and depict this reality of God, first of all, but then of Adam's sin? Because they recognize, I think intuitively, and I think rightly so, that to paint something isn't just to make something cool or pretty. To paint something is to bring people into a deep truth about reality. And Michelangelo kind of intuited that I need to draw on the biblical narratives and bring people close to God, right? And he did it to the best of his ability, I would argue. And throughout centuries now, he's influenced people and motivated and inspired and helped us to remember. But here's the thing. He's trying at the best as he can, as you're mentioning, through his limited way, to draw us into the reality of God. However, as you're pointing out, the Eucharist is something that's unique. It doesn't just paint the face of God. Man actually encounters the face of God in the Eucharist. It's very different from the artistic ability, the creative ability. And I think another connection you can make is that the priest is uniquely commissioned by the church through the Holy Spirit, in the Holy Spirit, bringing about the remembrative act. He's the one, through the hands of the bishop, infused with the Holy Spirit, that is able to bring the elements of the earth and the people back to God. And I think the artist plays a role in that, but I think, as you're pointing out, with all due respect, that the priest particularly plays a role in that.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, and if the priest is the artist par excellence, then that means Christ, the high priest, in whose priesthood every lower P priest participates. Yes. He himself is the artist.
Correct. Right.
Which means makes perfect sense, because he's the Word, he's the Logos through whom creation was spoke. He is the intelligibility and form behind everything that is.
Yep.
And then that does make his priestly act on the cross simultaneously as he's dying, one of his most, if not his most creative act. Namely the creation of new life, the new creation, which he is bringing about.
Listen, I remember you just reminded me, Joey, of Pope Benedict. I think the 16th said that the highest creation that the church can produce is the saints.
Right.
Because they show us, they reflect in their lives the reality of God dwelling within them, that God calling out to man.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at with this idea of art being inspiring to you in your particular life. Right? So the priest is the ultimate form of the artist, right? That imitates Christ, who is the artist par excellence, as you would say. And so we're supposed to be imitators of Christ, right? In our own lives, right? So Christ performs the ultimate exitus et reditus, right? The ultimate return back to the Father. And then we have to do that in our own lives with everything we do. Like, everything we do. And it's like, are you going to meticulously think about how brushing your teeth or what you should eat for lunch or what book you should read or what should you do at work today, whether all those things are micro exitus et reditus, returns to the Father? It's like, the unexamined life is not worth living. Like, yes. So it's like that's the whole game. The whole game is to see how everything fits in a hierarchy back to the Father. Like that's the call to holiness. And so, obviously it sounds like daunting and like too highfalutin when you say it that way, but the way it's lived out is very intuitively, as long as you have your eyes fixed on the proper thing, that everything falls into its place.
And if you look at the saints, that's exactly what they do. The smallest actions of their lives are sacrifices back to the Father. And you talked about sacrifice as a focusing on one thing. So like, I'm thinking of Saint John of the Cross, who could look at like a bug and just be like overcome with awe and wonder at this aspect of creation.
Correct. Not because the bug has a little rosary on it, right? Because it's a bug.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm thinking of your sister who's drawn the Air Force Ones. It's like all she's saying, she's helping us. Like she's saying, look at that, like focus on this, like this good thing. And then in focusing it on it, like offer it to the Father.
And I think something that has been lost is the ability to think fractally at different levels and to realize that, okay, so drawing Air Force Ones is not the same as going to Mass, but that doesn't mean we have to combine those two things and say everything has to be super holy or nothing should be holy. Like everything has to exist in that hierarchical way. Some things have to be in the narthex, right? Air Force Ones are in the narthex.
My man. I'm glad we agree. There should be relics, actually.
Maybe one day a pair of Air Force Ones will be relics.
Well, if anybody got it there, it was Carlo Cutis. He was close with that,
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I could probably continue this conversation for another couple hours, but we have Holy Hour, and I'm sure you have diapers to change and whatnot. So I guess if you could tell our audience, tell our listeners where they can find you, how they can support you, and then if you have any closing remarks, Matt, we'd love to hear them.
You can find me anywhere at Matt Hylom. That's MattHylom.
Good, well done. Good job.
Yeah, thank you. I'm horrible at spelling. I have a podcast where I break down some of my lyrics, some of the production stuff, and just general ideas around my lyrics, called the Matt Hylom Headspace. I started that last month. You can check out my commercial music on morninglightmusic.io. If you're a creator or a video creator, you want to use my music for your podcast, as you guys do. Yeah, that's basically it. I really appreciate you guys having me on. It was a blast. I do agree, Joey. We could talk about this for a couple hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we'll be able to do it again sometime. But Matt,
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming on. We will. We're praying for you in your capacity as a husband and father for sure, but then also in your creative work. It's awesome. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, guys.
There's a lot to be said. I wish I could say more. I wish we could talk more.
I'm sure you could say more.
I can always say more. It's true. Saying less is actually my failure. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for the friendship. Thank you for coming on to Logos Podcast. Thank you for what you do as a creative, for bringing hope into the world. And kind of doing what you do, bro, through your life, and through your humility.
Absolutely.
That I've experienced in you too. And I hope that our listeners are inspired to create something good, but something beautiful, but at least start somewhere, and at least in your own lives begin to reorganize, to recreate and offer them as best as you can to God the Father, because that's what's going to bring us salvation at the end of the day. And so, friends, thank you for tuning into this episode of Logos Podcast. We thank Matt for coming on. We thank Joey to some extent for being on. And above all, we thank our Lord Jesus Christ, the Logos of reality, who guides all creation back to himself. Thank you guys. And as always, God bless.